the blood-drenched arena of Nocturna's realm, the air thick with tension. Eldritch stands, visibly weak, his skin pale, his breath shallow. Black ichor drips from his lips, a poison he cannot purge. Before him looms Duncan McDruston, a monster forged in rage and destruction, the beast of a man, taller and broader than any warrior, eyes wild with madness, moves like a force of nature. Duncan snarls at Eldritch. "You cheated me, Eldritch. You stole my victory. You stole my right. And now I will rip you apart piece by piece." Duncan lunges. There is no hesitation, no pause, no restraint. He slams into Eldritch with the force of a warhammer, sending him flying across the stone floor. Eldritch barely has time to react before Duncan is on him again. A brutal fist crushes into his ribs, then another. The sound of cracking bones echoes in the empty arena. Eldritch staggers, gasping, but Duncan doesn't stop. He grips Eldritch by the throat, lifting him off the ground with one arm as if he weighs nothing. Duncan, screaming in rage, spittle flying from his lips. "You do not deserve to die quickly, traitor. You do not deserve an end, only suffering." Eldritch's body twitches in his grip, his hands clawing weakly at Duncan's wrist, but the strength is gone. His vision blurs, black ichor spills from his lips, his limbs go slack. Then, with a sickening crack, Duncan twists Eldritch's neck. The sound reverberates like a thunderclap. Eldritch's body hangs limp, silent, lifeless. Duncan stares, his breath heavy, his chest rising and falling with each rage-fueled gasp. Then his grip tightens, shaking Eldritch's lifeless form, refusing to believe it's over so easily. Duncan, roaring like an animal, shaking Eldritch's body violently. No, you don't get to die yet. You don't get to just leave. I need to hear you scream. I need to destroy." But there is nothing. No resistance, no pain, only the stillness of a broken corpse. Duncan drops Eldritch's body to the ground with a dull thud. He steps back, chest heaving, staring at the broken man before him. Duncan, his voice lowering, breathless, madness still seething beneath the surface. "I have won." He takes a staggering step back, then another, as if unsteady on his own feet. His mind reels. He has never felt such a void before. He should be victorious. He should feel satisfaction, completion, but instead, there is nothing. Nothing but silence. His lips peel back in a snarl, his hands clenching into fists as the realization strikes him like a dagger to the chest. He throws his head back and screams, a raw, agonized, insane scream that echoes through the void of Nocturna's domain. Duncan's voice, filled with pure madness. "No!" His howls of frustration shake the very foundation of the arena, but Eldritch does not move. He is still, broken, dead. And yet, something unseen lingers in the air, something beyond Duncan's comprehension, something stirring beneath the surface of the void, waiting. The arena was silent, save for the erratic, heavy breaths of Duncan McDruston. His broad chest rose and fell like a beast on the hunt, his muscles twitching with unspent rage. His fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white, his body trembling, his mind lost in the storm of madness that had consumed him for centuries. Duncan, snarling, voice booming like thunder. "I have won. The prize is mine. Now send me back. I must destroy." He threw his head back and howled into the void, his voice stretching far beyond the arena, reaching into the abyss of Nocturna's realm. His veins burned with the promise of bloodshed, of unleashed destruction, of chaos untethered. He needed more. He needed to feed his wrath. And yet, nothing came. No shift in reality, no return to the living world, only silence. Duncan's rage twisted into impatience, his breaths turning to ragged snarls. His wild eyes flickered to Eldritch's corpse, still sprawled on the arena floor, black ichor pooling beneath him, his body unnaturally still. Duncan, spitting, voice venomous. "You are nothing. You never were." He turned away, but then he felt it. The air cooled. A sharp, unnatural chill slithered through the arena. Duncan paused, his body tensing. Something was wrong. Then crack. The sound echoed like splintering bone, like old wood twisting beneath immense pressure. Duncan snapped his gaze back to Eldritch's body. The corpse twitched. A sudden, sickening jolt ran through the lifeless husk. Bones popped and shifted. Skin stretched tight against the skull, aging and rotting in places. The black ichor seeping into his very flesh. His limbs convulsed unnaturally, twisting in ways no human body should move. Then, with an eerie grace, Eldritch stood. Duncan froze. Eldritch's head tilted unnaturally, the movement jagged and stiff, as if testing his own muscles. Then, ever so slowly, his eyes opened. No longer human, no longer dull. They burned. Two deep crimson pools of light, the glow of something ancient, something wrong, something returned. Duncan's rage twisted into something else, something unfamiliar, a feeling he had never once known in all his centuries of war and bloodshed. Fear. Eldritch's lips curled, revealing elongated, razor-sharp fangs. His breath was slow, steady, calculated, and when he finally spoke, his voice was layered, hollow, touched by something beyond the grave. Eldritch. Calmly, but with an eerie finality. "You never understood, Duncan. Destruction is meaningless without purpose." Duncan roared in defiance, shaking off the unease creeping into his bones. His fury ignited once more, surging through his veins like wildfire. He would not be afraid. He would not accept this. He would finish what he started. He charged, his massive body moving with earth-shattering force, his fists ready to break this abomination once and for all. But Eldritch was no longer where he had stood. Duncan's strike hit empty air, and then pain. An iron grip clamped down on Duncan's wrist, a force beyond comprehension, beyond mortality. Duncan's eyes barely had time to widen before snap. His arm twisted violently, bone shattering in a grotesque spiral. A soundless scream tore from his lips, not from pain. Duncan did not feel pain, but from sheer shock. He had never been overpowered. He had never been outmatched. But now something had changed. Eldritch was faster. Eldritch was stronger. And Eldritch was merciless. Duncan snarled, his broken arm twitching, but before he could react, before he could even think, Eldritch moved. A blur of shadow, impossible speed, then a single, deliberate swing. Duncan's world shifted. The momentum of the strike carried him, not his body, but his head. For a moment, he felt nothing. Then, he saw his own body standing before him, frozen in place, a fountain of black ichor erupting from the severed stump of his neck. His own lifeless form collapsed to its knees, then toppled forward, the sound of flesh hitting stone a final punctuation to his existence. Duncan McDruston, destroyer of men, harbinger of carnage, the unbreakable, was no more. His severed head hit the ground, rolling to a stop at Eldritch's feet, and for the first time in an eternity, Duncan was silent. Eldritch exhaled, slow and measured. He lifted his gaze to the darkened sky of Nocturna's domain, the crimson glow in his eyes flickering, as if something inside him was still shifting, still awakening. Then, without a word, he stepped forward, leaving Duncan's broken husk behind, vanishing into the shadows of the arena. A deafening boom of thunder split the sky, shaking the very foundation of Nocturna's domain. The shadows around the arena twisted and writhed, screaming in anguish as a form materialized from the swirling abyss. Nocturna had arrived. His towering figure stood, cloaked in blackness, darker than the void itself. His eyes burned with the cold, pitiless rage of the infinite dead. He looked upon Eldritch, his face carved in pure fury. Nocturna, voice echoing like 1,000 whispers from the grave. "You cheated." Eldritch, still weak, his body still recovering from the transformation, stood firm. He wiped the last remnants of black ichor from his lips and met Nocturna's blazing gaze with defiance. Eldritch, calmly, unwavering. "No, I used what was available to me." Nocturna's rage boiled. The ground beneath him cracked and crumbled. The very air around them decayed. Shadows recoiled from his wrath as he stepped forward. Nocturna, snarling, voice shaking the realm. "You drank from my elders. You stole power that was not yours to take. You perverted the trial." But before he could unleash his fury, before he could erase Eldritch from existence, the realm shuddered. A deathly silence fell. The shadows curled away. The ground blackened, rotted, and collapsed into dust. And from the decay, something rose. A skeletal figure, ancient and impossibly vast, clawed its way from the abyss. The very concept of death itself had arrived. Necros, his hollow eyes, bottomless voids of nothingness, locked onto Nocturna. His voice, slow and deliberate, carried the weight of all that had ever perished. Necros, calmly yet absolute. "Hold, Nocturna. This one has completed the trials thus far." The air shimmered, golden dust swirling in the decay. A soft, ethereal wisp spiraled into existence, then expanded. The golden light took form, materializing into Lysana, god of the lichens, the primal force of nature itself. His voice was not commanding. It did not need to be. It was simply truth. Lysanor, gazing at Eldritch, then to Nocturna. "The trial is complete." A final shift. The golden air tore open, revealing a gateway, a radiant, swirling portal of pure golden energy. From it, a figure stepped forth, the glint of a chrome mask, a familiar presence, a force beyond gods. "Winter." He said nothing. He did not need to. His very presence commanded order. He observed. And he was pleased. Nocturna's rage was uncontainable. His very form distorted, black tendrils of pure shadow lashing at the air barely restrained. Nocturna, growling, voice venomous. "He is not allowed to become an elder. He has violated the trial. I will smite him from existence myself." Strangely, it was Necros who spoke next. Necros, his words slow, final, inevitable. He used what the trials provided. A pause then. "I too was angered at him passing my trial. I did not expect it, but then I understood. These trials are just the beginning." Necros stepped forward, towering over Eldritch. "Necros," to Nocturna, his voice cutting through the void. "His final trial, his ultimate test, will decide everything." For the first time in eons, Nocturna paused. He understood. The three gods locked eyes. Necros, Lysanor, and Nocturna. And then, without another word, they walked away together. Their conversation would last eons. A discussion of fate, power, and the balance of existence. Eldritch had no place in that conversation. Not yet. Eldritch stood, weary but victorious. His body ached, his soul burned with the remnants of the vampire's blood, but he had done it. Winter approached. Winter. His voice measured, but amused. "Well, well. Old friend, it seems you've completed all but one trial, and this last one may well be your greatest challenge yet." Eldritch met Winter's gaze. He was exhausted, but he could not hide his curiosity. "Eldritch, smirking, weak but defiant. Harder than this. Harder than letting that brute kill me so I could become an elder. Do you know how disgusting it was to drink the blood of a dying vampire, to let it rot inside me, waiting for me to die? Winter said nothing. He simply watched, waiting. Then after a long silence, he spoke. Winter, calm yet absolute. You have done well, Eldritch. A pause. And you are the first to complete these trials. Eldritch's expression hardened. He knew what was coming next. Winter, lowering his voice, almost regretful. I cannot help you. I cannot guide you. I cannot influence your choice. A pause, then. I wish you well, old friend. The crimson tear glowed one final time. Eldritch did not hesitate. He grasped it, feeling its familiar pull. And then he was gone. The arena fell silent. Winter stood alone, watching where his friend had vanished. Then quietly, almost as if speaking to no one at all, he murmured, softly to himself, "Choose well, Eldritch." Eldritch appeared in a vast, echoing chamber, the air thick with an unnatural energy. The glow of crimson light pulsed through the very walls, illuminating the room like a beating heart. The energy was almost alive. At the very centre of this immense space, a single object hovered, a crimson tear, unlike any Eldritch had seen before. It was larger, brighter, more powerful. The air around it hummed with divine energy, its radiance casting deep shadows that twisted along the walls. Then, without warning, the tear spoke. Its voice was not singular. It was many, layered upon itself, the voices of Nocturna, Necros, and Lysanor combined. Their tones blended into one, neither threatening nor comforting, simply absolute. Crimson tear, voiced like a chorus of gods. Well done, Eldritch. You are the first to complete these trials, and so you are the first to face this final trial. Eldritch stood tall, bracing himself for whatever came next. He had fought monsters, outwitted gods, survived impossible battles. But now, in this moment, he sensed something different. This was not a fight to survive. This was something greater. Tear pulsed, its crimson glow deepening, as if feeding off his thoughts. This power is the combined essence of all three gods. It is pure balance. It can be used only once, and it has the power to return you to your realm, to your world. Eldritch felt the energy ripple through him. It was immense, unlike anything he had encountered before. This was true power, power beyond vampires, beyond elders, beyond even the gods themselves. But then, the tear's next words made him pause. But your trial is a choice. Eldritch's expression hardened. A choice. This was the final test. He had been expecting another impossible battle, another unwinnable fight. But no, this was something far more dangerous. A choice. His choice. How you return is your decision. Do you return as a man, as you once were, mortal, finite? Or do you return as an elder, as what you became, power, immortal? Choose, Eldritch, and choose well. The crimson tear pulsed, waiting, watching. The air in the chamber felt heavy with expectation. Eldritch said nothing. He simply stared at the tear, his mind racing. This was it, his final trial. No tricks, no battles, no enemies, only one question, and his answer. The crimson tear pulsed in the darkness, waiting, watching. Eldritch did not answer, not yet. Instead, he closed his eyes, and for the first time in over 1,000 years, he allowed himself to remember. Not as an elder, not as a warrior, but as a man. a lifetime ago. The man called Eldritch. The scent of fresh earth and pine filled the air. The sound of laughter echoed in the open field where a young Eldritch stood, surrounded by friends and life. The golden sun of an afternoon sky shone upon them, its warmth caressing their skin. He was not a warrior, not a vampire, not an elder, just a man who had yet to know loss, pain, or eternity. He was laughing, truly laughing, his arms wrapped around the woman he loved. She was radiant, her eyes full of mischief. They danced in the open field, barefoot, carefree, with nothing in the world to worry about except the setting sun. Nearby, a group of his friends cheered, calling his name. His father clapped him on the back. His mother's voice scolded playfully from the distance, warning them not to be out too late. Eldritch could feel it, the warmth of the sun, the beating of his own heart, the exhaustion from running, from laughing too much, from feeling too much. His chest rose and fell with each breath, his body mortal, fragile, alive. A younger version of himself turned to his love, their hands intertwined. He whispered a promise, one made by men throughout time, a promise as old as love itself. Young Eldritch, forever. His love smiled, shaking her head, amused. His love, forever? What a ridiculous thing to say, Eldritch. Nothing lasts forever. He pulled her close, whispering against her ear. Young Eldritch, I swear it, even if it was possible. I would never leave you, even if the gods themselves willed it. I would defy them. She laughed, and the sound was the most beautiful thing he had ever heard. But then, like all things, the memory began to fade. The light died, the warmth vanished, and the sun set. Eldritch, the Elder, the cost of forever. The world turned cold. The sun was no more, replaced by the pale glow of a blood moon. The once laughing man was gone, replaced by something else. Eldritch stood atop a stone balcony, staring down at a city bathed in darkness. The streets below belonged to him. The creatures of the night bowed at his presence. He had become what he once swore he never would, a creature that defied the gods, that defied time itself. He had become Eldritch the Elder, and for over 12 centuries he had lived. The feeling of a beating heart, gone. The exhaustion from laughter, replaced. Now his body held an unnatural stillness. He did not need to breathe. He did not need to eat the food of men. He had transcended. But at what cost? The memory of warmth was replaced by the taste of blood. His fangs had sunk into thousands, draining the lives of beggars, thieves, kings, and warriors. He had fed on the weak and the powerful alike, not for survival, but because he could, because he was beyond them. The faces of those he had drained blurred together. They meant nothing. They were cattle, mortal, fleeting, temporary. Their names, their lives, their loves, all erased the moment they entered his grasp. And then he saw her. His love, the woman he had danced with under the sun. She stood before him, her face pale, her body trembling. But her eyes were the same. They were filled with fear, heartbreak, and recognition. She whispered his name, but not as a lover. No, she whispered it like a curse, like something to be feared. She begged him to let her go, to remember, to be the man she once loved. But Eldritch did not remember. He only saw prey. He only saw blood. And so he took her, drained her, fed upon the very thing he once swore to never abandon. She was gone, and for the first time in his existence, he felt nothing. The choice that awaited. Eldritch snapped back to the present, his body shaking. The images burned into his mind, the weight of them crushing. The crimson tear watched. It had shown him everything, the life he once had, the monstrosity he had become. You have seen both paths. Now, Eldritch, what will you be? Eldritch did not answer. Not yet. He simply stared, caught between two eternities, one of warmth, of laughter, of life, the other of shadows, of power, of eternity. One step forward, and he could reclaim all that was taken from him. He could breathe again, feel the warmth of the sun, grow old, die. One step forward, and he could take back what was his: power, strength, the gift of eternity. Never again would he be weak. Never again would he feel loss. He could have one. He could not have both. And so, Eldritch stood, caught between two fates, between two worlds, between the man he was and the monster he had become. The crimson tear pulsed in the void, waiting, watching, the weight of eternity balanced upon the shoulders of the one man who had walked farther than any before him, a man who had lived, who had died, who had transcended, yet now stood on the precipice of his final decision. Crimson tear, its voice deep, endless, timeless. Speak, Eldritch, your choice must be made. What will you be? Eldritch stood before the glowing tear. The two paths stretched before him, the man, the elder. He let out a slow breath. Then he spoke, his voice steady, thoughtful, deliberate. Eldritch, I have lived for over 12 centuries. I have seen the rise and fall of empires, the birth of ideas, the destruction of entire ways of life. I have seen kings become beggars and beggars rise to rule. I have watched as mortals burned their lives away in pursuit of things that, in the end, did nothing but turn to dust in their hands. He clenched his fists, feeling the weight of his words as they left his lips. Power, wealth, immortality, all of it is borrowed. Borrowed from time, borrowed from fate, borrowed from Nocturna. And one day, the debt will come due. I have walked the path of the Elder long enough to know this. The crimson tear pulsed, listening. It did not speak. It did not interfere. It simply watched. Yet, I also know something else. Each day as a mortal counts for hundreds as an elder. A day spent breathing, laughing, feeling. A day spent among people, among those who love, those who struggle, those who live. That day is worth an entire century of darkness. The life of an elder is long, but it is empty. The life of a man is fleeting, but it is full. His eyes darkened, his voice steady, unwavering. And yet, to extend my life, to enrich others with what I have learned, to guide them, to save them from the fate of wasting their lives chasing nothing, that too has meaning. To be a teacher, a mentor, an immortal scholar, not to hoard wisdom, but to give it freely, to help others achieve the state I now understand. That would be glorious. The glow of the crimson tear brightened, illuminating Eldritch's face in deep scarlet light. He felt its presence pressing upon him, awaiting the choice, awaiting his choice. Eldritch let out a slow breath, then looked up, not at the tear, but at the reader, at the unseen presence, the watchers of his journey, the ones who had followed him through the trials, through the blood, through the darkness. He turned, his piercing eyes locking forward, locking on them.
So, here I stand, at the edge of eternity, faced with a choice no one before me has ever made. To live again as a man, mortal, fleeting, but to feel every heartbeat, every moment, as though it were my last. Or to remain an elder to watch centuries pass like whispers in the wind, to carry knowledge beyond death, but never again to truly live. If it were you standing here, what would you choose?
The crimson tear pulsed one last time, and then the world vanished.